doesn't work. I mean, so going through these slides is kind of a non-issue. The issue is, what is the future plan to correct the issues, right?
Yep.
So
yep.
going
we'll talk
through
a
these
little bit about
slides,
that.
I think, is kind of a waste of time.
Okay, well, we'll buzz through them. So I think the intent is just to give a little bit of background to everybody and to get us on the same
We all know
page.
the background.
I'd like to see them.
I'd like to see them.
Yeah.
Go forward with the presentation.
Questions at the end.
Sure.
Questions at the end, let's move forward.
Okay. So these were just some photos that were provided by constituents that we've heard from, citizens. Talked to a few of you and emailed with you. So you can see here just the very poor condition, the amount of water that's sitting there. Oops. And then how it abuts up to private drives and garages and how it's impacting those properties as well. Here you can see the amount of spray, if you will, that's gone onto the adjacent fences, and how do you get that off? So that's just kind of laying the groundwork there. So we do, just a little bit of background data, we do have 374 alleys within the city that equates to 42 miles, so quite a bit. Only 11% of those are paved, and you can see in the drawing there, the red ones, they're primarily along the Broadway corridor, and then a few over on the west side of town, mostly in that industrial area south of Hampton. So why are the alleys in such bad condition? So this is an ongoing issue every year. I'm sure you longtime residents have experienced this throughout the seasons, and it'd be interesting to hear your stories on that. But we think this year is particularly bad because although we haven't, we're hitting about average snowfall, we have had more freeze-thaw cycles. You know, where we have warm days, and then the weather or the snow melts, freezes, and then it's just creating more potholes. Also, in certain areas, there's more construction traffic. So if there's construction going on in that block, the construction vehicles are using the alley often to access those lots. So we're definitely seeing an increase in damage at those locations. And what is the city doing to correct the alleys? We have gone in, so I'm just going to introduce my staff real briefly. We do have our street staff here, our Public Works and Operations Manager, Steve Ortega, if you want to raise your hand. Jimmy DiPiazza, who's our street supervisor. Then we have our inspection staff, Sean Farmer, Kevin Christensen, Roy Dye, and Hang Nguyen. Thank you for being here. I think it's important to hear your feedback directly. So they all play a role. The street staff, obviously, in maintenance, and then our inspectors are the ones out there actually interacting with contractors to make sure that they're enforcing these types of things. But we did go down, we tried to take the grader down a few alleys, and it just really made it worse. So we need to let those alleys dry out and let that water just dry out enough so that we have enough of a base to work from. Our plan is to then haul in additional gravel to level low spots, and then to grade the alleys to ensure positive drainage. So we typically grade them so that there's a V down the middle, but then they have to tip out to either end. So if we're creating just a low spot in the middle, or if traffic creates that low spot, it's not going to drain. And so we need to go in there and really look at the grades, especially the flat ones, as I'm sure you can attest to as well. That's even harder, that we got to get that positive drainage back to those side streets. We are going to put at least 2 crews on this, and we're going to create a schedule and a map so that it's prioritized based on severity. I know everybody thinks that theirs is going to go first, but we're going to publish that map, put it on the website, and hopefully clip away at this as soon as the weather gets a little bit better. So that's our plan right now. Some questions have been raised about trash and recycling service. So as you know, each individual homeowner has to contract for trash. So we don't have one provider throughout the whole city. And so really it's up to them. Although we do provide them, they have to have a business license through the city, we do not dictate what type of, how they perform their service or anything like that. So if they make the decision not to go down the alleys, that's really up to them. While we certainly hope that we can maintain that better, it's really up to the individual companies of how they are providing service. And then finally, just about alley paving. As a result of this spraying, and we continue throughout the year to get requests for paving the alleys. It is a very expensive proposition. A typical alley, as it says up there, if we pave it in concrete, you have to do it at least 8 inches thick, and it can cost anywhere from $175,000 to $250,000. And the other piece of that, and that's depending on whether you have to put storm drains. So some alleys you can't get away with grading, let's say, so that it drains to either end. So if you have to put a storm drain in the low spot, let's say to drain that water out some way, then you're adding, of course, pipes into the ground, and that adds to the cost. So that's why kind of the long or wide range there. Currently, there is no funding in place, and part of that is because we don't have a policy either as to how we're going to go about paving the alleys. So just some questions there that we need to answer is which alleys should be paved first? Should that come through a petition from the neighbors, let's say, of all the folks on that block, or the 2 blocks that abut that alley? Do we need to get 100%, everybody in agreement that we should do this? And then should adjacent property owners share in the costs, and if so, how much? Should it be 100%? Should it be 50%? And then where do we come up with the funds? So those are some of the policy questions that we have to answer and work with City Council if we move forward with this. And then finally, as I said, so these policy decisions need to get decided along with the funding source before we can really move forward with alley paving. But some of those are ideas or thoughts. We'd love to hear your feedback on that, because it does make a big difference. If it's 100% participation, who goes out and collects those? How do you get to 100% participation when people have different finance, levels? People might not be at a place where although they want the alley paving, they might not be in a place at this particular time to be able to do that or contribute to that. And all those factors have to be considered as we move forward and establish a policy. So I'll wrap up here.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Are there other alternatives to concrete in paving the alleys?
Yes, we have done a few in asphalt, so the black surface that are on the streets, and that is a cheaper alternative. The downside is that those tend to not last as long as concrete, and so then it becomes a life cycle analysis, because you do get the heavy trash trucks kind of pounding them. So if you do it in concrete, the theory is that it will last, and it's true, it will last longer. But I think we have to keep asphalt on the table. We have also talked about ideas like permeable pavements, so that the storm water actually runs into the ground as opposed to running off onto private property or adding to the volume of storm water in the drainage system. We have not explored that in terms of costs, but that's something that we're going to be exploring.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Have you figured out what the cost is for the current structure of just regrading often with 2 crews and 4 people? How much does that usually cost per year?
I'm not sure. That's part of our annual operating budget, so I don't think it's an extra cost that we're talking about. It's something that we have within our current budget to do with existing staff. Yes, sir.
What is the responsibility of developers when it comes to these alleys and construction projects, particularly with landfill that's been excavated and basically dumped in the alley?
Yeah, so I'll transition to our building department to talk a little bit about that. But so when it's illegal, basically, that they can't dump that dirt in the public right away. So usually 99% of the time, alleys are owned by the city. And so anything that's deposited back there, they can't use that as a storage site, nor can they use that as a parking area. So it's really about enforcement then to make sure that those things don't happen.
So if it hasn't been enforced, what is our recourse?
Then I think it's calling the city to say, hey, we've got a situation out here, and Karen will talk a little bit about kind of this friendly neighbor. We've got a flyer available that she can provide some more information on. Maybe that's a good segue, or I'll take a couple more questions here. Yeah?
So if you say that the alleys are owned by the city, and we're looking at as homeowners as contributing to paving the alleys that you own, how does that work?
Well, I think it's similar to any improvement. Ultimately, well, yes, the city owns the streets, owns the storm sewer, owns the water lines. It's ultimately to serve the public, and so the money has to come from some source. So whether it's taxes or a combination of assessments or, direct contribution from the property owners plus tax money. It's some sort of funding has to be identified. But it is your responsibility to maintain sidewalks, alleys, that sort of thing per our municipal code. Actually. Yeah, ma'am?
Okay. So I know you're going back to the trash pickup because you can just see in a day the changes that happen. One of the big things is, can Englewood enforce that you have to have like an alcove for the trash can versus having the trash can just sit? Because what happens is there's trash can, and other people have to put their trash out on the street. And the big trash trucks come and then they create a different pathway. Those are where the cube puddles are.
I see.
Wherever there's a trash can, it's sitting. So I understand that you can't control the trash vendors, but would you be able to say, if you're going to have your trash can out there, you need to make a space, like how many feet off of the alley, so that there's a dedicated spot for the trash. And I think that alone would help tremendously.
I think that's a great idea. I don't believe there's anything in the code right now that requires that. But I think, yeah, if you had a paved edge, and telling people to keep it out of that kind of 10 to 12 foot area so the vehicles have room to go. I know that's been an issue where people just kind of put it out there and now all of a sudden, yeah, it becomes an obstacle really for all vehicles. Yes, ma'am.
Again, with the trash issue, I think we have somewhere around 6 different companies going up and down the alleys and up and down the streets. I don't understand why Englewood doesn't do it. Denver doesn't have one particular trash company take care of it all. It would certainly be easier on the pavement.
So do you mind if I jump in on that one? We are going to have a study session within City Council, I believe, the 22nd of this month, where we are going to be discussing the trash hauling within the city.
It's a real problem.
It is a real problem, and I've been having a lot of feedback, especially since American Disposal just recently stated that they won't be picking up trash or recycling within the alley. So the concern there obviously is that they won't be they're the second that I'm aware of since I've been in Englewood that has decided not to recycling or trash and recycling within the alley. So concern is that it's actually 11 providers within the city doing trash hauling. The concern is that obviously more are going to be moving towards that direction in the future and not leaving many citizens with an option of where to have their trash.
I can't get my trash
Right.
from my garage to the front.
I have citizens within, on the side of Sherman, basically, that if they're in the middle, they have to basically walk all the way around in order to get the trash and recycling into the front door.
That's what we have to do for
Right.
our middle unit, so I have
So
to walk
it's-
through those giant mud puddles
Yep.
that are 7 feet across and 3 feet deep to haul my things around to the front of the house.
So it's definitely a concern, it's something that we need to address.
Yeah.
And is this meeting open to the public?
Oh, yes. Yes, I'll post some information, and again, I have a sign-in sheet in the back. If you can provide an email address, I'll wrap up some of the issues that we talked about today, as well as provide just communication about any future town halls and other issues that I find important for the citizenry.
We'll take a few more in this gentleman's hand, and then there's a lady over in the far side.
Sure. And so to get back to the backfill in the alleys, I think the problem is multi-tiered because what you're having, especially in the alleys with a lot of construction, in particular, there's a duplex being built behind my property, and I've only lived at my house for about 4 months, and what I'm seeing is, when they dig these foundations, the dirt then gets regraded into the alley and not properly compacted, plus it ruins the road base, so you end up with the potholes and the mud bogs. And then the construction fencing, what it does is it forces trash trucks and construction vehicles to then drive further closer, in my particular case, onto my property, which is now cracking my concrete slab to my garage. There's a bigger problem than just trash trucks, and it's a whole I guess a pie full of problems here.
So and just to clarify, so they took the dirt from the house lot and dumped it in the alley and then just kind of graded it out?
They did not dump it, but as they plan to put the new garage, they grade that, you know, their property, and some of that dirt gets into the alley, which then causes the mud problems.
I
Because
see.
if it was road-based, it, you know, it'd be a firmer, more compacted, you know, drive.
Sure.
And that's not the case, at least in my house. So now I have property damage, and also a growing issue that, you know, we can't even get my wife's car in the garage because it's so muddy back there.
Good to know. I'm just gonna go to this lady, she's been holding her hand up here for a while.
Okay, I wanted to say, I've lived in my home for 35 years. I live on Logan. I'm a block up or halfway up my alley when they comment about, you know, why does Englewood pay for alleys? And I'm thinking, do you have any idea what this would cost? And I figured it would go end up being in our property taxes. So the alley is not my issue. My big issue is American, what they have done. It is such a pain in the butt to have to now, I'm on a hill to take those stupid things, which I did before I came here, now out in the streets. And the other thing is because of all the construction that goes on at Swedish and Craig, all those employees, and I'm sure also employees with the hospital, park on Logan. Because we try to get a permit like Pennsylvania has, as a 2-hour permit. I don't know whatever happened with that. There was some kind of trying to get that done, and he moved. Because he could never park it, and he had a garage, but he could never, and he was down by the gate, or Gillett, or Gerard, thank you. He was down there, he was in one of the new homes that they scraped, and he had a 2-car garage in the alley. But I'm sure if he wanted to have somebody over, we're gonna have to park next block over because of all this construction with the cars and the vehicles and whatever. So I thought, is all this coming out the alley because of American? I've talked to them a couple of times, and they say, well, it's not safe for the drivers. I said, the only company that I know that I had was Waste Management, and their recycle was on the street because they drive these huge trucks. And I do understand with the low hanging, but their trucks aren't any different than the rest of them, but now they're going to curbside. And it's just such an inconvenience. And, oh yeah, we're really sorry, but this is, you know, what we've done. And I figured they get care less, and they're concerned about the drivers. But what do you think those trucks are going to do tomorrow when they're picking up and Logan? Everybody knows what Logan looks like. And they're going to stop traffic to go each house with their little thing, dump it over, and they're blocking traffic.
Yeah.
Because they park on Logan because of all those employees at Craig and Swedish. Not only employees, but I think a lot of them are construction workers. They have no place to park.
They did just open, Swedish opened that big parking garage, so hopefully
Yeah,
they'll.
it's not, I think it's Craig. I think Craig
Okay,
has another.
that's the
Or another
spillover?
parking.
Yeah.
So do you mind if I get your information so we can talk about the parking permit issue?
Yeah.
Sure.
We'll talk about that after.
Yeah, we can certainly talk about how to do that. And this-
Hi, thanks for the presentation, I appreciate it, It's information. I'm a president of our HOA, small HOA right near Swedish Hospital, and I just wondered, what's your projection of your income coming in to help with the alleys? I'm right in Corona, right near Swedish Corona and Ogden, and about every other house now is we've got slot homes and 2 or 3. So you're going to be getting 2 or 3 residents being put in place of a single family. So I just wondered, do you see any projection of money coming in that way to help out? Or and we've had damage. We had sewage damage from the construction going up. And with about a triple increase of people using the alley, so that's another factor. It's just a pure increase. I've lived there 7 years, but I know we've had a tough winter, but just an increase in traffic now, people getting into the garages, and it's just become pretty untenable.
Yeah, so you're saying revenue like from building permits or?
Right.
Yeah. I don't know that specifically. I think what we have to examine right now, let's say if a home goes in the middle of the block, we need to look at something maybe where we require them to contribute to paving their portion of the alley. Because we probably should do the whole thing, so it's more like a contribution than having them just do the one piece. For commercial buildings, we have recently made them pave from like their lot to the nearest block, at least. But for residential, I think that's a place where we need to examine more and look at that. What requirements do we put on these new types of developments? Okay. And this gentleman back here, and then I'll get you next, ma'am. Sorry.
I've been in construction my whole life, and I have interest in the 27, 28, and 2900 block of South Sherman. It's all in R2B. And I work for myself. I work a lot of nights, so I'm home during the day. And you know, I've observed, thank gosh, I've got a great contractor that has worked on the 27 and 2800 block. It's very conscientious, but just the issue alone with when they go to do their sewer taps, they have to dig that all up. Now they have 2 taps. Maybe, you know, if they choose to split it up, they put all of that fill. It's about 10, 12 feet deep. It all mixes in with the road base. It goes back in, and they aren't having to put, you know, the actual road base back on. And what I've observed myself, and I actually even have some photos if you'd like to see them, is that they dump their tandems of backfill, they haul it away, then they're cut, and then they bring their fill back, they dump it in the middle of the alley, where a skid steer or loader just takes it and pushes it in and puts it back on the thing. So it doesn't just wreck that property line of Daniel and IFC, you know, it really affects properties to whichever direction that they're going. And so, you know, I'm not going to help any way I can. I'd like to end on a positive note. You guys are talking about, because the trash and the alleys do intermingle, but this is about the alleys. But I wish Dave was here from zoning. He worked extreme. I'm hoping that when you're talking about trash, that you don't change this. Is he worked very, very, very hard to get all of the trash companies to pick up on Wednesdays. In our zone, we have trash trucks on Wednesdays, so they're not trickling through all times of day. So that was just such a thing to bring peace and quiet to the neighborhood. And we just have chaos one day instead of throughout. So hopefully you don't change that, and he deserves a big attaboy for that.
Great,
Thanks for that, Dan. One more question, and then we have a few more slides to regarding community development.
I'm in the 300 block of South Ogden, and we don't have any road base whatsoever in our alley. It's actually just pure dirt. So I'm curious to see, like, when has it last been gravel? Because it doesn't look like any time recently. And then the second question I have is, are we allowed as individual homeowners to pave behind our immediate properties? You mentioned that just a second ago, that's something we're allowed to do.
I think we would allow that, and you would need to obviously get the permit, but then we'd also expect that you would design it enough to make sure that we wouldn't have to rip that out in the future. So let's say you pave your section, we'd have to make sure that that worked in an overall plan, so there'd have to be some engineering that you'd incur to do that. So let's say your neighbor wanted to do that, they'd build onto that and so on. So you'd have to look at the overall alley design to make sure that it worked before you just paved your section.
Or if we brought in like a truck of road base and did it ourselves, like is that a problem?
We've just recently heard about that somebody did that without a permit. You would still need a permit for that, and it just sank away. So I think it's about getting the right size of gravel too. You know, we can certainly help you with that. But I hope, you know, our spring effort here will make a big difference for people. And then, you know, where you wouldn't have to do that type of interim maintenance yourself.
Yeah, I think it's odd that we have to look to you guys as more of a consultant than just providing the actual service. I really think, I mean, if you looked at my alley, it's unreal right now. It's like 10 times worse than that picture you showed.
Okay.
So it's just ridiculous.
We're going to transition. There'll still be time for questions. I'm going to let Karen Martinez, our building official, speak to some of the items that she deals with contractors.
Good evening. The residential building code is silent when it comes to the public right-of-way or erosion control or anything of that nature. However, a couple of years ago, because we have so much construction going on in the city, we developed a flyer, a guideline, to hand out to contractors and also to homeowners, just to kind of make them aware of some of the things that need permitting, also, you know, making people aware of parking issues, and basically just asking the contractors to be respectful of the neighboring properties. As you know, that doesn't always happen. So when we get complaints, I reach out to the contractors and ask them to please be, you know, aware of the neighbors, not to block the driveways, the alleys, etc. And a lot of that, as far as blocking traffic or the streets, those require permits from Public Works. But that's one of the ways that we try to help with some of these issues. As far as the alleys, we don't have any codes that would provide us with a way to issue any kind of notice of a violation. But once again, we try to work with the contractors. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
So I thought the previous speaker said that contractors were not allowed to put excavated fill into the alleys.
Not excavated fill, no. And then if they were to do that, then at that time, Public Works could issue them, I'm assuming, some kind of notice or have them remove that.
Okay, so I live on an alley where you didn't do that, and you've signed off on this guy's project. So as far as I'm concerned, you now own the problem. You agreed to let the contractor off the hook, so now you're on the hook.
When we issue the certificate of occupancy, we do that based upon every department within the city has signed off on the project.
So you didn't answer my question.
Well,
you signed off on it, and the builder violated the code. What are you going to do about it?
I have no answer to that. I'm sorry. I would reach out, I think, to Public Works to work with them on getting with the contractor and correcting those issues.
I would imagine these are easy revenue streams. I mean, if you actually enforce the
She said that they're not going to do anything.
They would solve the alley problem if we actually enforce some of the codes that we have.
Well, like I said, under the residential building code, it doesn't address any of those issues. It focuses on the property on which the work is being done. Yes.
Most cities, and I believe this one also does, takes into account something that they call inventory photos, where in fact the surrounding properties to the property that's being developed are in fact inventory with photographs. And prior to signing off on occupancy, any damage or modifications to surrounding properties should be required, and almost always is in every municipality, to be restored prior to an occupancy permit being issued.
To my
so
knowledge,
my situation is exactly the same as everybody else's. My issue is construction. The contractor was not required to restore the alley to a condition prior to their activity. So I guess, this is a development project with the entire city. More and more construction development is going to go on now for a longer period of time. We haven't addressed this issue, so who's going to be the party? It's going to take responsibility from the city to make sure that this isn't a problem going forward.
I think that's why we're all here together, is to hear the different issues and make sure that we're addressing those throughout the process.
So again,
that you don't end up with that.
Whose responsibility is it? Who's going to take ownership to make sure that this isn't a problem in the future, so that future occupancy permits are not going to be issued until this issue is in fact addressed, so we don't end up perpetuating this problem for the next 10 years?
And once again, that will be a group effort to make sure that everything is being looked at and we're not signing off on something.
Who's the public?
Let me jump in here. So that is a good point. So what would be the action item from here? So, and I'll ask Director Power here. In terms of just taking that step in terms of inventory photos, is that something that they can do on their own, or do you have to involve the city attorney, or what aspect of this, in order to start that process, what is it that we need to do?
Well, I think what Karen was alluding to is, unlike some of the cities that, sir, you were referring to, we don't explicitly have that in our codes requiring kind of the before, during, and after construction photos. If we wanted to do something like that, we could certainly take a look at that in terms of working with the city council to amend our codes to require that. One of the things that we'd probably do in terms of that situation is we would require the contractor to provide us with those inventories over time throughout the project, so then at the time of sign off we could do the comparison and remedy any problems. We would have to add that to our code at this point, and that's certainly something we could take a look at in conjunction with some of these other efforts that we may have to do along with the city council. The other thing I would like to say is we do have some of these materials here tonight, so on the way out, if you're interested in grabbing one of those. One of the things that we really rely on is the people who are having the eyes on the street, in this case the alleys, to be in touch with us, especially as construction is starting in the neighborhoods, so that if there are issues that you're starting to identify, we can get in touch with those contractors and those developers as soon as we can.
So I just wanted to say one thing, because Mr. Dupree, you're right. This is, especially within District 1, we're seeing a lot more construction happen. So this is going to be an issue that gets bigger. At least the way that I foresee it, there's going to be more development that happens within the city of Englewood. So I do believe that this is an issue that we need to take up on council pretty quickly. So I will work with Director Power to find out what I need to do in order to raise that up for city council to take a look at.
So what happens when you have property damage from the construction and then various other trash services, for instance, are probably causing property damage too because of the construction? And if there's no code enforcement and no fines issued, where do I go as a homeowner? If, you know, I approach the builder and they don't want to replace my concrete or my neighbor's concrete or whatever, is it on me now to sue that builder, or do I sue the city for not enforcing their code?
If they cause damage to your property, then it's a civil issue with you and the contractor.
But you issued the permit.
Yes, we issued
and you
the
didn't
permit.
enforce it.
We issued a permit based, and the permit is for the property that's being built. There's nothing in the code that addresses neighboring.
So if they say the trash companies damaged my property, then do I have to go after the trash companies, even though I saw their track hoe roll over my concrete slab?
Once again, it would be a civil issue, it's not something that
And
the city could.
that same track hoe was the track hoe that's dumping all their fill dirt into the alley and then regrading it? So I think quickly, before, you know, Englewood's a very builder-friendly city. I would propose that, you know, there start being fines issued for alley maintenance, especially, you know, when almost every other house in some areas are being either scraped or and I live in one. You know, I live in a house that was that the pop was topped, and I'm sure it caused some damage to other people's property when it was being finished. But, you know, like I said, I've only lived in the area for, you know, 4.5 months, and my concrete slab, which was in perfect condition when I moved in, is now smashed.
I'm going to help you out, Karen. All of these things that the building department they take care of inside those property lines. Within that, everybody's answer to where the buck stops, it is public works. That's who's supposed to take care of those. I was told that those inventory photos were being told, so I've shared with my neighbors that they take these inventory photos of the alley, of adjacent property lines, sidewalk, curb and gutter, asphalt, and my understanding is that was a requirement. This is from a city official. And Public Works just shouldn't sign off on this stuff. And Karen's taking the brunt of it. It isn't hers outside the property. Am I right? Karen, as far as
outside of the property line, no.
Yeah, so that's not your guys' problem, but it is Public Works to make sure that it got put back the way it should be. And they do have to sign that final CO card. So hopefully that was helpful to you, Karen. I love you, buddy.
Yes, ma'am.
I remember prior to about 2008, it seemed like the alleys were graded, it seemed like 4 times a year, if not more or less, but really consistently. And there was always like some new material dropped as they were grading. Not every single time, but it seemed like the maintenance, before some big budget cuts during that time period, there was a lot of attention given to alleys. And I'm wondering, I don't recall the last time I saw a grader in our alley. I don't recall regular maintenance being just done to prevent drainage issues. So it always goes back to budget, but
I'll let
seriously.
Director DeAndrea.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. So we have scaled back since that time. When the recession hit, there has been fewer resources, staff and monetary resources, even equipment that are available. But I think, you know, given we're on a program now to move to the front here so everybody can see more effort with our pavement to look at it on a zone-by-zone area and really be thoughtful about having an overall city program. And we talked about doing a similar thing for the alleys. Even if we can't pave them, how can we maintain them in a more proactive manner and address that? And I think a part of that is, you know, using a different size gravel and then showing, right now we don't have good maintenance records, I'll tell you that. And so what we need to do is start to document that in a better fashion and make sure that we're not only evaluating, but actively, you know, again, being proactive with our maintenance so we don't get to this point.
Well, and I can say too that I remember the guy who would grade the alleys seemed to have a bit of pride in what he was doing. I mean, it was like he, you know, and I never, ever thought to complain about our alleys. They always looked great.
Well, thank you for that. And so I would hope we can get back to, at least, again, we're communicating when we're going to do that and that we're keeping it in a better condition. Did you want to speak, sir?
Yeah, so this actually kind of touches on it. So I think you presented a kind of a good path forward for kind of the short-term solutions, and obviously understanding that long-term is extremely expensive. Everyone gets that. I still am a little unclear as to kind of like this long-term solution. So you mentioned asphalt can, you know, crack and crumble. We talked about individual paving for homeowners. So this might be more of a comment that I hope that the city is looking into even alternative modes. So for instance, you know, green infrastructure and things like that in alleyways. And so maybe that is a question. I don't know if planning is looking at that, if city council is looking at that in a study session. Because I mean, it's always going to rain, it's always going to snow, we can't control that. The alleys are always going to be dirt, so we're always going to have this issue. But looking at other ways to actually soak up some of that water, is that something that's on the radar of public works or planning? And, you know, maybe even be creative about it. I'm sure that there's, you know, companies out there that have kind of this pervious material, or they have developed ways, and maybe even be looked at as kind of a test case. And maybe that could help alleviate some of the costs as well. So as the city, you know,
yeah, I think that's kind of will be one of our next steps. So I mentioned permeable pavements. So I think that has to be, we have, you know, concrete, asphalt, so those are solid surfaces, but we need to look at permeable as well. And I think the direction is that we need to come back with a policy plan for council to consider, as well as then those costs for those different elements and kind of the pros and cons, if you will, of each of those.
Yeah.
So I think for the long term, that would be our plan.
Great, thank you. So, and you might know the answer to this, but what would be the timing on something like that? Because obviously this issue it's a critical issue in the winter and in the spring. And you guys obviously have to do your homework and come up with something, but what do you think the timing would be? And then how would that be available for the public to view and comment on?
Certainly, yeah. I would say in the next probably 3 to 6 months, we would want to bring that back, something to council. We're just starting now on our 2020 budget process. So I think it's a good time to be discussing that and then get more of a long-term plan for moving into the future. Yeah, sorry, ma'am, I'm just going to hit other people who haven't spoken yet. Yeah.
Me?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. I noticed in the last few years that the department, whenever they dump dirt in the alley and stuff, it's not road base that they're dumping in there, it's just regular fill dirt. It has no gravel under it, it's just mud. That was, I'd say 15 years ago, every time they dumped something in there, you could tell it was a road base, it was a heavy gravel and stuff. But the last few years, they've used regular fill dirt, it looked like.
Really, good feedback.
We had one neighbor there that their garage was blocked out, the hole was so bad, he couldn't get in, and they came in and filled it in with mud. He ended up getting stuck in the alley.
Yeah, so for folks who don't know much about road construction, so there are different materials and they're graded, so there's different sizes, so that you can actually buy a specific, you know, size or mix of dirt and rocks so that they form a pretty solid base. So just getting dirt, you know, regular dirt doesn't work. It's really got to be road base material that is designed to be in those alleys that takes that heavy traffic. Yes, that's that gentleman back there. You, sir. Yeah, you.
Yeah. Is there any way of getting a detailed breakout for the maintenance costs per block, per alley? So, you know, putting that fill down on a regular basis or whatever over a year?
We don't really have good maintenance records of how much that costs. We could estimate that
Okay.
if that was desired. You know, how much does it take for a typical block to come and fill
Right.
and grade and all that? We could estimate that.
You know, we could provide a proposal what it would cost for that regular maintenance
Sure.
versus what we would put down like concrete that would take, you know,
Yeah.
and permeate 800 gallons in an hour.
Yeah. I'm going to jump to this gentleman in the back first. Way in the back.
So I'm glad it's been brought up. I've spoken with a number of employees of the city, and I've been told that, especially in the last administration, the funding for maintenance on the alleys has been sucked out to be allocated into other areas of the city. And I think what we're seeing now is the byproduct of that non-focus, if you will, on the alleys. There are obviously a lot of things that we could do moving forward, but it absolutely looks like that where we're at today, because I've lived in Englewood, well, all my life, but most recently for the last 6 years, and it has absolutely changed in the last 6 years. The other thing that I wanted to bring up as well as a question is, has the city done any impact analysis when we start talking about construction with regards to what now the ADU ordinance that's been passed is going to place as far as an added burden onto the existing alleys?
No analysis to my knowledge, no.
Okay.
So I think, you know, based on the feedback, it's really about how do we go forward with enforcement and coordination amongst the departments.
Yeah, but it's not an enforcement
And I'm
issue with
sorry,
ADUs.
This gentleman's back.
So my builder, who seems like a pretty responsible guy, is also building a duplex about a block away, and he's probably going to apply for his certificate of occupancy here pretty soon. The alley there, he has done the exact same thing. He's dumped 150 yards of 12 feet of excavated material back there. This is an issue you guys need to get on now, right?
Yep.
And he needs to be required to come and fix, before you give him another certificate of occupancy anywhere, he needs to come back and fix the ones he's done. So what is the enforcement mechanism? What can I do? I keep hearing 3 to 6 months, and we're going to put our heads together and we're going to do all this, but something needs to be done now. Who do I need to speak with?
Certainly. So yeah, please call the, you know, you can register, there's an online email that you can send, or what we call Q alert, or you can just call the Public Works Department, which is 303, I forget the number now, 762-2500. So, and we do have cards here from our inspection staff. I don't know, Sean, if you want to speak to that, of what we do immediately. I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute. What can we do immediately with permits?
You know what?
I'm going to give you the. So Sean's our right-of-way construction manager.
So the thing that we're running into is we're having a battle with contractors right now too, and the things that we do is, you know, we do require them to bond. So we've started to get to the point to where the immediate concern is if they have something that needs to be done, we do hold that bond. And so we're starting to work towards the point now to where that's our leverage for them. And it's going to be, and we're starting to kind of have that battle, and we're starting to see more wins than losses on that side. So it holds them accountable, and starting to hold them accountable. It's kind of a slow process because right now the way the code sits is when they come in and do an alley, or they come in and do any work at all in a lot, we require them to restore things to the condition that it was when they got there. So that's kind of one of the problems that we run into, is trying to get them to go above and beyond. It is hard, especially when they get there from a contractor standpoint. They get there and they look at it and say, okay, I've restored this to the position that it was or equal to when I got here. And so now, to turn the corner, what we're doing is, like I said, we require a bond from them. So now we're forcing the issue where we have inspectors on site and we're watching what bill goes into the background, back in the hole when we catch it.
But you didn't do that, and now we're stuck. I did not restore it to even the condition that it was in before the project. I don't know if you have a bond, but I'm telling you, he's got more certificates of occupancy he wants signed off on. There's your leverage, pal. Don't issue him another CO until he fixes the crap that he screwed up already.
No, understand. That's the kind of feedback that we want, as well as addresses and what property's been affected, and those are the things that we need from you guys. And that's where we try to catch as much stuff as we can, and we're working towards a solution to try and figure out how we're gonna split people up and keep a better eye on that stuff. I'm a big believer in is we gotta hold them accountable, and we have to be there a lot. So I think that's gonna help, is we're trying to figure out right now is I know my group, we're trying to rearrange things to where we try and have somebody there as much as we possibly can. If we're there and they can do the right thing, and more times than not they'll do the right thing. There are times where things do, I don't want to say slip through the cracks, but there are times there when they might have a little bit of feel, but those are things that we'll have to address as we go. But I know that I've been here a couple of years, and it's getting better. It's a slow and steady process, but the immediate concern is we are addressing that. And like I said, we're starting to leverage other things, and I agree with you.
So there is a process then for things that have already been screwed up in the past?
We're working on the things that we can dictate moving forward. The things that have happened in the past, 2, 3, 4 years ago, I've been here a couple of years, so I know the things that have happened since I've been here, and those are the things that I'm trying to address now, and we're trying to address as an overall group. But we are finding more tools, and we are making it harder to build. We make these guys replace frontage now, which is something we never used to do. So now we're going to tackle the alleys and say, okay, it's not just a matter of, okay, we got to go one step further and say, okay, not only do you have to restore it to the condition it was now, but it has to be able to be affected by your neighbors too. Your neighboring properties have to be okay with the work that you've done. So it is something that we're aware of, and it is something that we're trying to position ourselves to where that doesn't happen anymore. So it's something we're working very diligent on, and we're catching everybody as they go, but we're making it harder and harder as we go for the contractors to work, and that's the overall goal. Because I do the right of way, and I'm with you guys, and I'm on everybody's side. I'm a big believer that there shouldn't be a blow and go process. We should hold them accountable in every step, and those are the things that we're working towards. And it's a process, but we do see that, and we do recognize it, and we are trying to make some changes to adjust.
So Sean, just a quick question. So just to go back to the original comment where some of the construction that was done in the past, we know the same builder is trying to get a certificate of occupancy. So there is no recourse for us to go back and have him fix what happened in the past. There's nothing that we can do as a city to do that before we get the CO.
No, not to my knowledge. If it's something that's already been occupied, I feel like you're kind of a little late in the game at that point in time. It's, especially like I said, if it's happened a few years ago.
This happened 6 months ago. Are you telling me my only recourse is to sue the city of Englewood? Is that what you guys want? Do you want lawsuits? This is crazy.
So I think that's a legal question we have to ask. Can we go back?
So I'll take that as an action item and get back with the city attorney about what type of recourse we have.
So even though we've given the certificate of occupancy, what recourse do we have at this point if there are new issues that have arose or issues that weren't resolved?
Well, the city didn't do its job during the inspection process. You guys are ultimately responsible for this. If you can't figure out a way to enforce your codes with your builders, you're going to get sued. You talk about budget problems, you're going to have big budget problems.
Fair enough, and I'll get with you.
Why don't you make it mandatory?
I know here, and I'll get my card, and I'll get the address.
Yeah, so please do call in and write down addresses so we can start to look at those. Yes.
Hey, this is changing subject here just briefly, but to commenting to what you said, alternative type things. I got a neighbor that put down a truckload of small wood chips, and he put it in front of the dumpster. He's had no problems. The wood chips have soaked up the water, and it's been interesting to watch it. So I don't know much about wood chips, but it seems like it's doing something fairly positive.
Interesting.
All right, sounds like the code needs to be updated. So is that on the city council agenda?
I think that's what we were talking about, is in these next 3 to 6 months, we have to look at this holistically. What action points coming out of this do we need to address? So is that changing the code? Is it creating an alley paving program and doing some of this research? All of that, I think.
Right. And since, our property values have increased, we've increased our taxes, where has that money moved on. I mean, I understand that there was some big cuts in 2008. That was 11 years ago. I've lived in Englewood 23 years, and I have to agree with everybody else that alleys over the last 2 years have seriously decompensated. I mean, for many years, people were like, oh, you don't have your alleys paved. I said, it's never been a problem. I mean, even when we had really bad snowstorms in the early 2000s, it was not like this. So I don't think the dirt is getting put on. It seems like the alleys are almost unpaved.
So just to answer the question regarding revenues for the city, so the revenues for the city are increasing. We get about, 8% of the property taxes actually come, 8% of the revenues for Englewood actually come from property taxes. The majority comes from sales taxes within the city. So we don't get a large percentage of it, but it is something that I do want to educate the public on where exactly we are spending our money and where our revenues are coming from. So I'll make a point to provide that information as well.
And since the alleys are a big deal, I mean, along with property taxes, how would we petition to say, let's spend a certain percentage on the alleys?
Well, I think that's one of the things that we have to look at in terms of new construction, and how we want to put an impact be bringing new construction, whether it's residential or commercial, that the impact be will go directly towards infrastructure such as alleys or something along the line. So that is something that council should look at. But earmarking specific, it's something that we can definitely discuss if we need to earmark specific revenues or cost towards alleys.
Sure, and instead of wasting 6 months, why don't, the powers that be, and I don't think this is a political thing that needs to be voted on, I think you should just make those site photos mandatory, because if a contractor comes in, pulls a permit, and takes pictures of, all aspects of the alley that they're going to impact, then if there's damage, and it'll show up in the photos. So why not make it mandatory immediately?
Because requirements, so probably a good portion would probably say, sure, we'll do that. The problem is when you don't have, when somebody pushes back and says, show me where you require that, we have to have it in the code. So
put it in the code.
Yeah, and that takes time. So
it's one sentence in the code, and then we'll send it out,
So I have no experience with road construction. I'm guessing it probably costs a lot less to maintain a paved alley than a dirt alley. But you don't know what, because going back to the cost, I mean, we get it, the cost of paving an alley is expensive. But we don't know how much we're spending on maintenance because it's part of the annual budget. And so I'm wondering if someone could do numbers, because I think there would probably be a break-even point at some point if alleys are paved of not having to do as much maintenance.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
Yes, no,
I mean, I think this would be
time.
something to include in that study session.
Gotcha.
So can I ask a follow-up question regarding just the paving of the alleys? Is there a concern of paving the alleys and how that may impact the stormwater infrastructure within the city?
Yeah, I think so. So the question from Councilman Sierra was, will this impact the stormwater runoff? It does. So any amount of additional paved surface will make stormwater runoff faster. So instead of, even if, let's say you pave your lawn or a portion of your lawn to make a patio, that makes an incremental difference. You build a bigger garage, all of that, little things add up. So paving the alleys does impact that. And so that's why we want to look at permeable options to at least capture maybe some of that runoff below the pavement. So that's definitely a factor. But thank you, ma'am, for that feedback. Gentlemen, there.
Just quickly too, again, I was not misled, but there was, in regards to the inventory photos, is the guy who will remain nameless and is a good hard worker, just said, I don't have time to do this stuff. So I at that time contacted my council person and asked him, can I volunteer having this in my background to go before the demo permit is issued and go and take these inventory photos as a volunteer, and I'm even insured. As a volunteer, I got the eye roll, and what, I mean, if we can't even volunteer, to help with the problem. So I'm gonna volunteer again,
Okay.
if anybody would appreciate it.
I think my feedback to Councilman Sierra on that is really, my initial thought. We can certainly explore that with our legal staff. I think the concern is if you're taking pictures of anybody or anything these days, people are going to question why you're doing that, and that there's a possible confrontation there. And so from a safety aspect, we want to make sure that that's okay. You identify yourself, whatever the steps go into if we were to do something like that. That's why I would caution against that, but we can certainly explore it if it's as a volunteer opportunity. But you can imagine, that there's the potential there for that. Okay, this lady here.
2 questions. And they can relate in that some of my frustrations over the years in Englewood have been that it appears certain agencies don't work with other ones. So my first question is, if I wanted to pave my section of the alley, that would affect drainage of my neighbors. Is there going to be something that is reaching out, that it's not just going to be a permanent pull, check the box, move on? It's really going to be looking at the larger picture? If somebody wants to do that, I'm concerned about that.
Absolutely, yeah. So I was mentioning earlier, let's say somebody wanted to pave their portion of the alley. They would have to be a permit, but they'd also have to look at the engineering of the whole alley to make sure that it drains properly, because what we don't want is to put that down where it impacts private property, nor do we want to have to maybe rip that up, in the near future, and if we had to repave the whole alley and the grades change for some reason.
Well, and I think that's part of the alley study that needs to be done. There's the obvious problem in some of our alleys, mine being one of them, is the alley's getting chewed up, no matter what road base you put down. And I have to say, ours has been maintained. When we call, we do get service. So ours has been maintained, but I could share photos of it with anybody in this room. I bet we have potholes the size of swallowing cars right now. So ours has been maintained, and it's still not filling up.
Sure.
So I'm just concerned there needs to be a study, because the alleys themselves, the drainage, it's not in sections. It's literally flooding out people's houses, backyards. And we have things that are running through from one side of the street to the next side of the street, as evidenced by the hail, huge storm we had. I think it was in July. I mean, it was terrible, and the alley just contributed to it. So it's like, I think there needs to be a larger picture on this. Second question, I'm tired of feeling like I have to turn in my neighbors because they want to use the alley as storage for their garbage cans, for whatever rat bag cards and other crap they want to put out there. I don't want to turn them in. What do we do? Because it's making me have to service and pick up their garbage cans and drive around and create further potholes because we're all swerving and creating pathways because of these inconveniences. And I called code and I don't see anything happening.
Okay.
Not to mention, it's not really fun to turn in your neighbors, and I don't really see them I don't really want to go up to somebody's front door and say, hey, because you don't know how it's going to be.
Yeah, so I know code enforcement has come up. That's a part of the police department. Our code enforcement supervisor to step out, so he can't speak to this. But I would say that, in general, that is the way that we collect information, is for you to call in. You can remain anonymous, and the idea is that more eyes on the street help alert us to the problem. So while we would, I believe, I won't speak for police, but I believe the intent is to try and be more proactive. A majority of our responses come from citizen requests. So, but it is an issue. It's an issue for Public Works too, because illegal dumping, let's say somebody dumps a mattress in their alley.
Try a car. Someone abandoned a car.
Sure. And so if it's in usually it's 14 feet that we have between private property. If it's within that 14 feet and there's no identifying, any kind of information on the mattress that says, oh, it belongs to this gentleman at this property or this house, it's abandoned. And then that means Public Works is taking time to go pick that up, dump it at our dumpster, and then pay to dispose of that. So it really is a big, not only from a aesthetic issue, it's traffic, you know, it makes that swerving, if you will, because of the stuff out in the alley. But then it's an additional cost and resources that we take away from doing our regular maintenance to go pick up stuff like that. And we do have good data on that. We, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I would say that the majority of our requests for, you know, illegal dumping come from stuff that's in the alley. And so is it neighbors? Is it somebody, random person from Denver, you know, driving into Englewood and picking a random alley to dump their mattress in? I don't know. So that goes back to the trash hauling discussion and, you know, looking at some other methods of how we can get large item pickups, perhaps, you know, for those bigger bulky items. I don't have the answer, just speaking to that. Yes, this gentleman right behind you, ma'am.
Yes, so I moved here in June of last year in Denver, just a few blocks to the south of Yale. And, you know, it's all paved over there and all that. And I didn't think about, you know, the dirt alleys until now. I wouldn't have moved to Englewood had I known that I'm going to have to deal with this every year. And as building goes on, it will in Englewood, more and more people are going to want use of the alleys because of the garages. The ADUs, when those get built, people are going to have to walk the alleys to get to that new home. And for us to be not talking about not paving, like right off the bat, and try to figure out a road base on to keep this dirt for the foreseeable future is just mind-boggling. We should be saying we need to pave the alleys because of the new construction. We don't live in Mayberry. We're not going to be a first-class city or even a second-class city until we do this. When we pave the alleys, our property values are going to immediately go up because just a few blocks away is Denver, and it's 10 to 15% higher than that. And I think it's due in large part because we don't have this infrastructure. I guarantee you we're going to make that money back once we pay, figure out how to put it in the budget somehow. We can assess builders, part of it, sure. But having ADUs go up and all the new construction, there's just no way a dirt alley is going to fly and for us to be considered a legitimate city if we don't address it. Why don't we just talk about it now? Let's figure out how we can raise taxes. All of our home values are going to go up if we pave the alleys, I guarantee you. So,
George?
Hi, Maria. Thank you for putting on the meeting to start with. I agree with Mr. Nolan here in the sense that a lot of the older homes in this area they use the alley for just the garbage trucks, but there aren't garages on them. My Granby home and all the homes coming up next to me, like I cannot get into my garage, literally, because of the way the condition is. There was already an electrical pole, which a car actually got into an accident, knocked down the electrical pole on our street, and the city had to come and fix that. That's a big issue. Like it's not just my garbage having to mud into my car, literally cannot get into my garage that I paid for. The other thing, the homes that are built like mine already, the city has to come up with a plan, and I understand that takes time. But in regards to all the new construction, you know, like my home has like 3 feet of concrete outside of the garage. Why don't we just enforce or make a law that the builders, I mean, there's only like 10, 12 feet between my brand new home and the home on the other side. Why not make the builder fill in the 10-foot gap with concrete when they put down the foundation? It's only 10 feet. I mean, how much would that cost them? They bring in the materials, they have the workers, they already have everything. You have an entire brand new street of homes. If they did this for all those homes, for all the future alleys, then this will not be an issue for the city.
Yeah.
So we'll save you long term a lot of money.
I think the issue to that, kind of like I mentioned to a couple of folks, is making sure that the grades are right. So if we made them do that, does that work, you know, over the length of the alley to make sure that, let's say the house next door gets built, do they match that grade and does it work, you know, piece by piece, or do they contribute their section and then once we get enough, we build the whole alley, which is still making you wait, but at least we're getting contributions as we go along. There's a couple people in the back that had their hands. I'm gonna, this gentleman here.
Yeah, I agree with like pavement, because it's not only in the winter. When you gotta go out and hose your patio furniture off, and go out and have dinner out there, at night because of the dust. Trash truck comes by and you can't even see your neighbor across the alley. So it's not just when it snows, it's all year long.
Sure, so even in the summer, yeah.
Yeah, and then one other issue, like, if we do choose a trash company, instead of having 10 of them, I had both alley and street service. I have street service now, and I like the street service better. But some areas you don't have room to put all those trash cans out. So I have Waste Management, 2 or 3 companies coming down the alley with a smaller truck yet. Waste Connections, they don't go down the alley because their trucks are too big because of power lines. So we have to have a couple of different companies, like if the board says, okay, we're going to choose 2 companies. Got to have like 2 companies in the alley, 2 in the street, so we have a choice. Like these people here, they have to go all the way around the street. Now, I wouldn't want to vote to make other people inconvenient because I want my way. We have to have a choice.
Sure. Yeah, so I think, I think the intent of having alleys is to have the garbage service back there. But to your point, those large vehicles aren't necessarily even able to get, regardless of the surface of the condition of the alley, it's the overhead lines or the trees that get in the way of, even them going down during those good months. Yes?
So it just seems to make sense to tie in this question of the alleys being paved with the flood study and the idea of FEMA and all of the amount of money that it's going to take to correct the storm drainage issue. I mean, how could you not tie in the alleys to that whole equation that happened last summer? They're all in tandem. So it could be similar, like just plug that figure into the same, like it all has to be done.
There is a lot of infrastructure needs, so I would say not only the alleys and the storm sewer, but we know that there's significant costs associated with water mains and, fill in the blank.
Dump into this same kind of flood zone issue.
So just real quick on that, I believe this came up the other day that we're going to be talking about capital projects as part of city council here at the end of April. I want to say it's about the 26th or something. But we are going to be talking about just the greater need for all infrastructure projects, not just alleys or streets, but also the storm drainage, parks, all of that aspect about what the dollar figure is. So that's going to be, was it the 22nd? So it's the 22nd of April. So that's a 6 o'clock meeting on Monday night.
So, talking about the alleys and the code, which we know that we're going to be doing, how close can you put the fence to the alley? Is there like an easement in the code that it has to be a foot, 2 feet? Because what I noticed too, in just thinking of my alley, is it's gotten way worse since fences have come all the way up to the edge of it. Because there's no room at all. So if one person puts a trash can out, it's bad news.
Yeah, I know there is a distance. I'm not sure what it is off the top of my head. Do you know, Karen?
I think along the alleys it's on property.
0 setback? Okay. So it could be right on the property line. Yeah.
I think that's a huge problem too. And there should be a certain amount of space between the edge of the alley and the properties.
There's a hand in the back on this side? Yep.
Yeah, you were talking about that alleys were for primarily trash pickup, but according to 6-11-2, an alley is a public way less in size than a street, not designed for general travel, which is used primarily as a means of access to the rear of residence and business establishments that abut upon it, and which affords a secondary means of access. And also in the code, under 16-8-7, the alleys are defined what they have to be in size, If it's by a multifamily and commercial industrial districts, they're supposed to be 20 feet wide. Alleys in all other residential districts are supposed to be 16 feet.
So I was speaking in context of comparison between the street and the alleys. So typical other, Denver, other, post-World War development is the block and grid system that we have that follows the pattern established in Denver.
This is what code says about alleys.
So but I'm going back to planning. So the intent of laying out a block and grid system was to have alleys for a second means of access to the rear of your property. But it was also the intent is that you put the things back there so that, alleys were an option or the primary means of where the garbage would go. So changing that, if we wanted to talk about alley or garbage pickup on the front street versus the alleys, that's just a discussion. So I'm not taking it out of code, I'm just saying that was the context of planning across the US.
I understand that, but I don't have an alley. And I also know that, at least on my street, the most different pickups that we have are maybe 4. And I don't have a problem with it. The biggest problem I've got is with waste management and American Disposal, which now belongs to Waste Connections, and Lies, which now belongs to Waste Connections. They tend to pick up one place and go on, and then they come back 4 times to pick up at the other places. So they just don't seem to know where they need to pick up. So it's not a matter of how many trash haulers there are, which I want to have because I like to have choice and competition. But it's impossible when they're just being careless and they are making unnecessary trips. That's the issue. It's not really, we only have one day they pick up, and it's the biggest problem I've got is with waste management.
Sure. Okay. That's a lady.
Right. I've heard a lot of talk about cost of paving the alleys, and I think that that's an excuse because we have other cities in this area that have paved their alleys. For example, when Hickenloopers took office back in 2005, the first thing that he did was put together an alley paving program. And to date, they have now less than 100 dirt alleys. So it is possible, and I suggest we look at what they did about it.
Yeah. This gentleman's been waiting in the back here. You, sir. Yeah.
I was, my name is Bob Cruz. I was one of the people who wrote a memo that initiated a lot of these conversations. I want to thank Nathaniel, Karen Shaw, and yourself. I forgot your name, I'm sorry.
Maria. Yeah.
Maria, for the attention you're giving it. My comments are, I had the good fortune of moving in here on Labor Day. I moved into one of the new duplexes and we're blessed to live in one of the better houses in the area. Right? Our experience was that sometime mid-September they came by and graded the alley. I'm going to echo this gentleman's comment that I don't know if they put dirt down or not, but it was a dust bowl factory. My garage was filthy, my cars were filthy, my house was getting filthy from tracking it in. Okay? There was no evidence of what I consider to be normal maintenance being done. Okay? And it created a huge problem. The problem that you also suggested was that this was due to weather, due to construction traffic. I took the time to drive over on, Tacoma, Bannock, also between Sherman and Grant, and then my alley between Lincoln and Sherman. It is 100% damage done by construction that's creating the real problems. Anything else, I don't agree with that. You're making excuses. Okay? There is a trench in our alley. It was a trench. It was backfilled with dirt, and that's going to be a real, it's going to be an axle breaker here pretty soon. All right? So this has to be addressed. And somebody's got, and you said it, I've heard a lot of different conversations. Somebody's going to have to say, the buck stops with me before an occupancy permit is issued in order to prevent this problem continuing to reoccur and reoccur and reoccur. All right? Last thing, your remedies up there said you were going to spread gravel. That's like taking a pea shooter to try and shoot an elephant with my problem. All right? My problem there's going to have to be 6 inches or more of dirt, fill, clay, whatever. It's going to have to be removed. The puckering is now more than 6 or 8 inches high, when in fact a heavy truck goes by. Spreading gravel on top of that is just going to create a gravelly mess. It's not going to solve my problem. And my problem is I can't use my garage. Haven't been able to since mid-January. Question I have is when is action going to be taken that's going to allow me to use my garage? Okay? And there are several places as a result of construction on Tacoma, Bannock, my alley, and others that need immediate attention. And it's not going to be solved by just throwing some gravel on top of it.
Point taken. Thank you.
Okay? Or taking and nor do I want to sit here with my alley not being able to use my garage for the next 6 months. Last point, nothing has been said about Swallow Hill. Okay? The Swallow Hill traffic on the Sherman-Lincoln alley is excessive. That first, I'm going to say, quarter to 2/3 of a block coming off of Yale, okay? There's nothing that's going to hold up there other than concrete, and that is a mess, all right? It didn't take a week for that alley to be just in unacceptably bad condition, even after it was graded last September, right? So there's a lot, I know I said a lot of things here. Somebody's going to have to, the buck's going to have to stop with somebody to prevent this from happening in the future. That includes code, whatever, you guys get on it right away. And there's some immediate attention that's needed that's going to take more than just gravel.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
So for repairing and replacing sidewalks, the city uses a concrete utility. Can you explain a little bit about how the concrete utility works and maybe that would be applicable to perhaps doing something in the alleys?
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with the concrete utility program, that was the question. So for sidewalks out in the front of your property, again, it's a responsibility of the property owner, but we have people on your utility bill, you actually pay a concrete utility fee that covers that. So if we have a raised section or a portion of the sidewalk gets damaged to a certain extent, then we will come in and replace that, and we do that on an annual basis. People can opt out of that. I think we have roughly 800 out of 11,000 households who have opted out, maybe around 900. But the majority of people pay that on a quarterly basis. So we could certainly look at something like that because with the concrete utility, the sidewalk infrastructure is already in.
Right.
So the intent was to maintain it.
Okay.
And so, you know, we'd have to look at how do we get it in there, and then maybe there's a maintenance fee after that. Yeah, right way in the back, ma'am.
I know there's been a lot of talk about construction, and years ago there was concern that replacing these small homes with these large buildings that increase the lot coverage was going to lead to flooding. That was a huge concern. Drainage concerns. And I know the horse has already left the barn in a lot of respects in our neighborhood. It's changed dramatically in the last few years. But I'm wondering about impact fees, or if council has considered suggestions that were made years ago about lowering the amount of land that's allowed to be covered with concrete and large structures. Because it seems like a lot of people who are especially upset about this are living in newer homes, and this was a concern long before. Like, this has been a concern for a long time. And just wondering if council's going to consider those things.
I can talk to one portion of it. So we have discussed impact fees for residential and commercial. When you assess an impact fee, that has to go specifically towards, you're limited in what you're able to use those impact fees for, but I would believe that alleys or any type of maintenance for that area would qualify. So that is something that we need to look at again. We talked about it earlier this year. So it's very recent. In terms of This may be a better question for you, Director Power, in terms of limiting the lot size in terms of building. Is that something that we're doing today, or can you speak to that, or Karen?
I don't do the planning side of it, but I believe it is 40% lot coverage is the max. It's been like that for as long as I've worked here. So that would include new construction as well as existing. You know, I have a lot of people that have existing homes and are adding on, and they still have to meet that same criteria.
That lot size coverage, did that change with ADUs at all?
No.
Okay.
I live in an R2 zoning, and I think it's more than 40. I live on the north side of Dartmouth, and I think it's more than just the residential zoning R1.
Okay, I could be wrong. I'm going off the top of my head because that's not the part that I do, but I thought it was 40. So.
I don't know the number.
What are the requirements concerning the slot homes that seem to be going from all the way around the lot and close on all sides? What is the amount of land that's being left?
On the townhomes,
No,
I'm not sure what that would be.
Slot homes are where they put two properties on one.
Four, actually.
Oh, four.
Kathleen, I'll take that action item and get an answer for everyone.
Okay. And I also, as I'm hearing all of these issues, the Englewood Forward Comprehensive Plan has been in the works for years. And people have been talking about these concerns for years. And yet the only zoning that the Englewood Forward Comprehensive Plan dealt with and changed was the zoning that allowed all the development to come in and do all the development, increase the density that the plan wanted. So I am frustrated that zoning laws that would have protected the people who already exist and would have anticipated the hardships on our alleys would not already have, somebody would have had the wherewithal saying, we're bringing this in, what are we going to do to mitigate anticipated problems that always come up with construction. And what I am hearing, there is nothing. And some people just even 6 months ago are stuck. People can't get into there. So I have been critical of the city for a long time, and everyone knows that. This just is I am appalled, just like everyone else. And should there be a slowdown or a stop on further development until you guys get some laws in place, get some teeth in place, take care of those who already suffered and make sure no one else does? Because right now, it is just rampant. And what I am hearing is very disturbing. Sorry, thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead, sir.
I believe the new ADU availability requires a separate parking spot for that apartment above the garage. So right there, you're going to create a need for off-alley parking, and more traffic will occur. To me, that should contribute to the idea of paving everything. Because with all the ADUs that are going to happen, you'll have extra parking in the alley.
Go ahead.
As a fan of ADUs, I absolutely echo this woman's concern. I think it's smart to solve this problem first and get all of the ducks in a row so that the ADUs can be successful. And then the neighbors will also be supportive, and you'll see more, overall wins on that if the alleys are addressed first. Absolutely.
Thank you for the comment. Sir?
Sounds like you guys have a plan to make a plan here for the paving. Is there a timeline that you can give to us here on when we might actually anticipate seeing some sort of movement on your end? A lot of legacy homeowners in Englewood, a lot of new homeowners with even more new homeowners coming, in the coming months and years. I think it'd be beneficial to all of us here in this room if, you could perhaps elaborate a little bit more on what it is that you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and when we might expect to see some sort of recourse from that action.
Okay, so I can summarize a little bit. I'm sure that there's going to be more that comes up since we still have another half hour or so in here. So my big takeaway today is that I'm going to meet with the city attorney to find out what we need to do in terms of changing the code. So we do need to put something in there that does put, as Kathleen states, some teeth for the developers in terms of just going back and well, one, the site photos. That they need to bring it back to its original state, what it is that we need to do on that side, and talk to the city attorney about that. The other aspect of that is also, you know, if there is a builder still putting in newer construction and they haven't fixed the alleys or brought it back to the original state on the previous property, what can we do to keep them from issuing a new certificate of occupancy? So I think that to me, since there is going to be a lot more building occurring in the city, we need to start there. In terms of the short-term and long-term plan, I believe Director DeAndre did mention some of the plans that earlier on in terms of what the steps are there. I'm not sure, is Ally's part of the April 22nd conversation? I don't know. So Ally is, okay, so during the, again, it's a plan of a plan in a sense. So it's just identifying what the cost would be, what we would do in terms of funding, you know, just a repayment of the alleys or what we need to do in order to get to a long-term state. So that would be part of the conversation as well.
Sarah, I want to thank you. I've never heard, I've lived here over almost 30 years now, I've never heard a city council member talk as articulately, be as interested in, be as responsive with, and be intent on being responsibly proactive, period, in the city. So I am grateful you are here. I'm grateful you did this, and we are lucky to have you. So thank you.
Is there anything that I've missed there, Director DeAndre, in terms of just the short-term, long-term plan?
No, I think the code and, yeah, just getting a plan that we can share with the public and put it on our website so that we can get
The other takeaways I did get from this, though, was there was a couple concerns that I heard that we weren't actually laying road base as part of the alley maintenance. So is there anything that we can do there in terms of just identifying what we were laying down, or at least in the future make sure that we're laying down a road base? And then I believe it was Mr. Dupree that did mention that something bigger needs to happen within his alley, just on the 2700 block of Lincoln and Sherman, just because of Swallow Hill. So is that, I know that we were talking about prioritizing certain alleys in the neighborhood. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what that looks like in terms of identifying what the big problem areas are in the city, or?
Sure. Yes, so I think in terms of prioritization, so to Mr. Dupree's comment, I think we have to look at, are there locations where we just have to dig out material so that we can start fresh? So that will take additional time. In terms of prioritization, what we'll need to talk about internally with staff is how do we, you know, how everybody's alleys are bad. So where do we start and how do we prioritize that? And if we have multiple crews, do we work it from multiple angles? I think those are some of the things that we haven't figured out yet that we will be doing in the next few weeks. The goal would be is in the next month or so, you know, hopefully things dry out to the point where we can start that. And we will post that map and that plan, if you will, to the city's website.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am?
So we're on that 2700 block of South Sherman, and I know that you said your timeline for paving, which I absolutely agree with everyone here, paving is a must. But it sounds like that's going to take time, understandably. But is there the short-term fix? Is it going to take another 3 to 6 months to get the maintenance at least back up? Because we've lived in our house a year now. They've been there about a year and a half, and we've never seen any maintenance in our alleyway. So can that happen sooner than the 3 to 6 months while you guys figure out the paving issue?
Did you want to?
Yeah. So the intent, what I just mentioned about prioritizing alleys and putting a plan together would be over these next several months.
Okay, so that could happen sooner or that won't happen sooner?
It will happen. We have to let things dry out. So, you know, typically our last snow comes around the latter part of April. So depending on when the snow ends and where things start to dry out, we'll have developed a plan by then to go in and do maintenance. And that should take, you know, depending on the severity and how quickly we can do that, it's going to take at least a couple of months. So people, hopefully by drying out, you'll at least be able to drive that, but then we will have a plan that'll take a couple of months to get around to everybody's alleys. So by, summer, we should be there.
Can I add to that as well? So Public Works also presented to council another, just a plan for addressing maintenance for the roads as well earlier this year. So I think that that's something that we would want to do for alleys moving forward. So basically the plan is Public Works has broken up the city into quadrants. And so each year, one quadrant is going to have the roads resurfaced or just maintained. And so you'll know the timeline for when your quadrant's going to get, your roads are going to get maintained within your quadrant. We don't have that yet for alleys, but I think that that's something that we can easily identify, and just so you know what the schedule is going to be for, I guess for alleys, would it be like a major resurfacing or?
Again, so I think part of the...
So short term, we're filling in, digging out areas, filling in with gravel and grading it so that it drains. That's going to be in the next several months. Long term, with a paving plan, with a policy that talks about who's going to pay for that, where do we get the funding, that's going to come over the next 3 to 6 months. We will post all of that, but it's a council decision to talk about those policies and identify the funding. So that's our short term and long term.
Okay, thank you, that answered my question.
Okay.
Any other questions?
How long do I identify how to contact people?
That's a good question. So that's another good, that was one of my takeaways here, is that there's a lack of communication, not only, or at least it seems that we can do better in terms of communication between the public and the city, as well as internally within the city, talking within other departments. Maria DeAndre did mention calling Public Works for specific issues. What I don't want to become an issue when a public reaches out to the city is that it gets, basically if you call Public Works but it's not a Public Works issue, and it's more of a community development issue, I want to make sure that the city is working internally to identify this doesn't fall under us, but community development needs to take it, and they need to take an action item. So I think that that's something definitely that I'll bring up to the city manager in terms of just removing the silos that we have internally in terms of these specific issues. I think in the meantime, though, I think the best way would be to reach out to Public Works on a specific issue. I'll work with the city manager to identify what the best way is to make sure that there's a communication that happens internally. So, phone, is there something on the website that they can also? Okay. Right. So for anybody that showed up late, I do have a sign-in sheet. If you can provide an email address, I'll summarize the talking points of the meeting. I'll also provide just the best way to communicate within the city for any type of issues within the alley.
And this is primarily your meeting, you call it for time. The other council persons for the other districts, are they on board or are they clueless?
No, they're aware of the issues within the alley. I decided to, obviously this is something that's been coming up within my district. But when I first talked to citizens within my district, I realized that the photos that they took, it had to be happening within the city as a whole. So I decided to bring in, obviously, members of staff and just communicate it out. But they're aware of the issue. I think the next step is what it is that we're going to do about it. So obviously we've had great feedback tonight, and I'm definitely going to take it back and present it to council in terms of what it is that we need to do in terms of next steps.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, council member Sierra, and I just want to say thank you for staff for coming out and hearing us out as citizens, Maria DeAndre and the others that are here, Brad Power. Thank you so much for listening to us. I know it's you guys are under a lot of different constraints, and I just really appreciate you taking the time on an evening during dinner time to come out and listen to it. So that's just my thank you to you guys.
Thank you. Yes, Mike?
Yeah, Alfonso, will the slides be available to us as well?
So I'll definitely make them available through my Facebook page. I'll talk to staff and find out if I can have them posted on the city website. I'll probably post something on Nextdoor as well. I'll find a way to get the information out to the citizenry, especially the people that weren't able to make it based on the type of service.
Great, I appreciate
I haven't
it.
seen you for a while. How are you? Good.
Any other questions?
Going to Japan and back
So, a bit of a segue, but my alley has been graded.
Keep crossing the continent.
What's happened is that now that it's being graded, there are berms that have been created by the edges of the alley. And now my concrete slab is having water damage because I have big pools of water just staying there, and I don't know how to change it. So what kinds of things do we do in order to make sure the alley is graded in ways that it doesn't cause new problems in addition to the ones that are already there?
Yeah, so I think part of our plan of attack is that we will use smaller equipment. So we've been taking the very large yellow pieces of equipment down there. And so that will, because they're so big, it's hard to maneuver them and it creates that ridge. So I think using a smaller skid steer or a bobcat, if you're familiar with what those are, I think we'll do a better job and they're more detailed where they can get in. And the intent is not to have that. So we would not create that purposely. So our plan moving forward would be not creating those rooms.
Any other questions? Well, everyone, thank you very much for making time for us tonight and to discuss the issues that you have with the alley and possible solutions as well. As I mentioned, I am going to summarize what I took away from this meeting today, provide action items on my part, bring this forward to the city attorney, the city manager, and staff, and we'll go from there. But my contact information, I left a card, but I'll be in touch, and feel free to reach out to me if there's anything that pops up. Thanks again for making it out tonight.